meeting. This is the meeting that we have prior to going to our policy meeting, and the opportunity for us to learn about things that are coming up and projects that we're working on, actions that we're getting ready to take. But even up here, I feel like we ought to have introductions, and I'm going to start with our city attorney.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Good evening. I'm Victoria Watlington, your City Council member representing District 3.
Good evening, Dante Anderson, District 1.
Ed Driggs, District 7.
Tara Picari, District 6.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
By Lyles, Mayor.
Braxton Winston at large and serving as Mayor Pro Tem.
Good evening, Lawana Mayfield, serving at large.
Good evening, Renee Johnson, District 4.
Billy Tynes, Deputy City Clerk.
All right. I'd like to recognize and send Malcolm Graham our best wishes. Hopefully, he's not doing the two-step, but getting ready to do it as a result of his surgery today. I want to also acknowledge that James Mitchell will not join us this evening as well. So with that, before we go into our program, let me just kind of summarize that we're going to start off with the questions from the council to address the consent agenda items. I have nothing that has been pulled from the agenda as a result of the staff. So with that, Marie, would you help us with this?
Yes, thank you, and good evening. Council, I did not have any additional questions. I had a question on a business item that's before you, but no consent item questions. Did anybody have any at this time?
Hearing, I don't see that anyone has any of those discussions. So there are a couple of things I think that was sent out that we just want to make notice of. Earlier today on our council agenda, earlier today, the council members met regarding some of the work that the committees are doing, and there was some question about the availability of what we're planning or had planned for October the 20th, a housing and job summit. Today at your place that you will see a chart that I've referred to all city council committees, that while we had planned for this work to occur on October the 20th and 21st to allow more time to fully engage all of the council committees in a holistic approach towards our issues around jobs and housing, we are delaying this and asking for specific input from the council committees to help establish the groundwork so that we can continue to connect the idea of upward mobility and housing for everyone. So that's at your place today as well. Is there any other item that we needed to discuss before we move from this to the?
No, ma'am, but if it's at your pleasure, I don't know if you would like a motion to handle consent at this time.
I would like to have a motion for consent items, agenda items 28 through 44. And unless there's someone that would like to have one pull for comment, anyone that would like to have an item pull for comment? Ms. Mayfield?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, there were items that I would like to vote on separately. I personally am not in support of a couple of them, so I wanted to pull some property transaction items out.
All right. If you could just give me the list of numbers, we'll go with that.
And that would be helpful if my computer wanted to work right for me. So, oh no, those are separate. Number 41.
Item 41.
Item 42.
42.
43.
43.
44.
44.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to have an item voted on separately? All right. And I didn't add 15 as well.
Sorry, Ms. Mayfield, number 15 is business, so you can talk about that in the
Yes,
chamber.
that's on the business agenda for that. So it is the items 28 through 44. And so if we have no comment on any of the items, do I have a motion to approve the items 28 through 44 with the exception of 41, 42, 43, and 44?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous. And now I'll go to items first item is 41. Ms. Mayfield, I want to recognize you. This is property transaction, XCLT Tryon to OR parcels 4, 5, and 7 for condemnation. The property is being acquired by easements for a permanent greenway easement and a temporary construction easement. Ms. Mayfield, I wanted to recognize you for your comments.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, my comment is the same for all of these items, 41 through 44. And it is the fact that I have a challenge when we're looking at a condemnation of privately held property. This isn't property of a LLC. Condemnations, to me, create, even though I know we were saying staff, that is to continue the conversation. It potentially can lead to an individual having to hire an attorney to go back and forth. The idea of local government utilizing condemnation when it comes to gaining access to land for potential developments, I personally have a challenge with, which is therefore why I will be a no vote for these particular items.
All right. I know that in the past, we've had the city attorney comment on this as it's a way to get some things accomplished when there's not clarity, but I don't know if you've addressed this before, Mr. Baker?
I have not.
Okay. So perhaps we can have a response to that so that as we go forward.
I'm willing to move to approve it if both staff tells us there's some urgency around this. If there's not, I think it would be wise for us to wait till the next business agenda. But I don't want to assume there's not urgency, but I don't want to just make that without someone telling me.
All right, I see some folks have stepped into the room, and we're going to have someone from the staff address this.
Yes, Jennifer Smith, General Services. We can defer these till the next council meeting to get additional information and address
To
the
defer
concerns.
to the next council meeting with justifications along the update.
All right, I didn't know if it was justification or just a philosophical, does it make a difference for additional justification, or is it the philosophical part of it?
I support the deferral.
Okay.
The recommend, the
All right,
motion,
thank
so
you.
second.
Thank you very much. All right, Mayor Pro Tem?
Question about the use of condemnation. Is this a mutual partnership with the property owner? Or is this something that we're telling them that this is what we want to do, and they weren't in agreement, and we're kind of using this as a tool?
Are they in agreement to go to condemnation? I mean, we can't settle on a price, right?
I guess to clarify, has this been, with these property owners, has this been a collaborative effort, or is this a way that we're using leverage to create a collaborative effort?
Sure. Greg Crawford with Real Estate and General Services. So most of these transactions start off in the sense of collaboration, in that we're trying to explain the project, reach a negotiated settlement, whether through appraisal or other mechanisms, generally with appraisal. If the property owner does not agree with the project, or they have a difference of opinion of the compensation, that's where things break down. But we continue in good faith to negotiate the property throughout the process, even once condemnation has occurred. So that's the general process.
That's generally what I think we've said, is that you have a situation where it's often the compensation or offered, you can't reach agreement, a judge decides it, and that agreement is met, so.
That's right.
All right, Mr. Bakari?
I just, for me, and why, if it's okay to delay, I'd like to, I've experienced many of these, some of which it was a completely unreasonable party on the other side, that this was the last resort. And some of which were folks that were just kind of, saying, I don't think that's right. And all of a sudden, this was kind of like brought up maybe a little prematurely. If there's a way that we can just know which one of these it is with a little more certainty, perhaps even giving the person on the other side of this, I see it's the same gentleman on all 4 transactions, an opportunity to kind of write their perspective. I mean, again, we understand the importance of this tool in large complex timelines. But I've personally seen it used on both sides of this, and it would just make me feel more comfortable if we could have that view somehow.
All right, so that'll be in the follow-up, and it'll be on the next, in 2 weeks. So we have a zoning meeting next week. The next business meeting will be in 2 weeks, okay? Got it?
Okay.
All right, thank you. So with that, we have a motion on the floor. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. The motion is unanimous. So thank you very much. Is there anything else on the consent agenda? All right, hearing nothing else on the consent agenda, and now we will go to the action agenda review overview from the manager, and begin and then follow up with the equity and governance framework.
So thank you, Mayor, members of council. I believe this may be one of the final times I say that we had something that started in the previous council, and now in this process, we're bringing it to the new council. This was one of the items that came out of the EEE committee. And so to some council members who have heard this before, I apologize. For some of the members who will be hearing it for the first time, I do believe that Federico and team attempted to have some briefings for you, so that this isn't the first time that you're hearing about it publicly. So with that said, this is an opportunity for the council to hear about the equity and governance framework. It's the only item that we have in the action briefing, but there is a closed session item that we would like to be able to go through before you go into the chamber. So with that, Mayor, if there aren't any questions, I'd like to turn it over to Federico.
All right, Mr. Rios, you have the podium.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council, Mr. Manager, and staff. I'm honored again to come before you today to speak to the equity and governance framework. I will start by wishing everyone a happy Indigenous Peoples Day, also recognizing that we are still in Hispanic Heritage Month. So, as the manager has already laid out, today is really providing an overview, an update of the work that the EEE committee endeavored to undertake over the course of the last few months prior to this current council being seated. We hope that today we will be approving a path forward in the utilization of the equity and governance framework as a tool to support council policy development and decision making. We thought it important to share a timeline of the development of the equity and governance tool. Again, the EEE committee put in a great deal of effort to get us to the point where we are, and we wanted to recognize that. Over the course of February through March, the committee helped to develop, revise, really create the framework that you see. In April, the framework was voted out of committee. It was presented to full council during a strategy session in June, and through July, August, and September, we were able to undertake the engagement strategy that was approved at that time by council. Again, the goal here is to provide a high-level framework that can be used as a tool in council policy and decision-making. I know you all have seen this, but for the sake of context, we felt it important to include it in our conversation tonight. Much of the work of council has been to address the historic inequities that continue to be perpetrated in our present day and time. And so as we worked with the EEE committee, it was made really clear that there was a need to contextualize that history. And so on the slides, as I've referenced before, you see this continued perpetuation of racial and systemic inequities as they showed up in the Jim Crow South, the demolition of Brooklyn, the FHA loan process that was highlighted in the Color of Law book, and the maps that display the crescent and wedge from the Leading on Opportunity report. Again, vestiges of continual racial and structural racism as they show up in policy decisions throughout time over the course of over 100 years. We are grateful that council has taken it upon themselves to spend their time in the efforts that are listed here, along with our ADA work, our language access policy work, our housing locational tool, and other items, to create equity, really to address those historic items through its current work. How do we upend what has existed through policy and in the decisions that you all make? You all have demonstrated that. We may not have always called it or ever have called it an equity initiative, but in truth, there's a desire to really prioritize equity and ensure that all residents have equitable access to opportunity. So before I get into it, again, you all have seen these slides. I wanted to ensure that I put this out front. First, the framework is made up of 3 distinct but intersectional components. And so they all come together. They're not just one item, but they're 3 things that live together. So first, you'll see the framing statement. Then you'll actually see the equity and governance framework graphic, which really is 2 slides that go into the way that we work and our theory of change. And last, you'll see the equity lens tool, which are the guiding questions we are asking that council would apply in their policymaking processes. So here we start again with the framing statement. And I recognize that this is a lot of words, but if we focus on the highlighted areas, you see that the framing statement is really making a point to recognize and acknowledge the role that we've played, and to ensure that we are dedicating ourselves to an intentional strategic approach that incorporates an equity lens. Again, we recognize, you all as council, that there is a need to address racial and other inequities and exclusion, and we've listed the 6 goals that we have in this work. This was developed by looking at a number of items, including the item that Mr. Manager passed last year, our policy statement in regards to equity, as well as work that the county has done, which you can look at our county and city statement on structural racism as a public health crisis as a forebearer of this. I'm gonna get this right eventually. All right, so our first slide, again, in the graphic, demonstrates the interconnectedness of the work. There is one plank that is focused on staff service delivery and the strategy to incorporate said delivery. There's another plank where residents are providing that community engagement component, consistently providing input and feedback to the work that you all do and that we do as staff. And there's that shared accountability portion. Tonight, what we're really focusing in on is that middle plank, the policy piece that is incumbent on council to undertake. All of these things require resources and investments to get us to be able to achieve the 6 goals that are listed. Here again, you see that our theory of change is that by applying an equity lens, and taking into account the council responsibilities, those things that do not change over time, along with council initiatives, what changes from council to council, where you all choose to heighten your focus. And again, those core approaches that staff undertake, we would get to equitable, thriving individuals and communities. I think it's really important to share that a bulk of policies are developed and refined in council committees. And so this would be a tool that could be utilized at you all's discretion during those processes as you look to embed equity in your committee work. The equity lens tool, again, many people think of this in an abstract, but it's as simple as a set of guiding questions. It's a mindset. It's a tool that we use to help coach towards a mindset. It is not comprehensive. So council is using these questions to support the intentionality of prioritizing equity in decision-making. Again, it serves as a guide. It's not an end-all, be-all. There may be policy decisions where you end up asking all these questions and then some. There may be some where you only ask 1 or 2 or none. It's up to you all to use it to your discretion for the decisions that you make. I'm excited to show you this part because this part is new, although you all did the work. So if I took the time to really think about this from a practical application standpoint, the work that was done around neighborhood traffic calming. Previously with council, the program that was in place required a petition to be signed by homeowners and property owners before a speed bump or a stop could be added for eligible residential streets. Now, if you think about that, if we just focus in on homeowners and property owners, you see that that's an issue, right? We're a community that approximately has 44% of its population that rents. So that's 44% of people that are left out of a process. You all, after being brought this item by community members and by the wonderful people at Charlotte Department of Transit, along with collecting data and listening to those residents, were able to review and change the policy and make it more equitable. We're asking you to do this over time with all the policies that you undertake to look at or to create by really embedding this framework. So as I mentioned earlier, we were approved by council in June to move this item forward and to really begin engaging residents. And so taking into account the request from council, we conducted individual and small group meetings with all of you. We also worked with boards and commissions of the city in Charlotte, all of those listed here. We also sought feedback through representatives of community-based organizations, residents in their own right, who had a great deal to say about this item. The feedback was overwhelmingly in support of prioritizing equity, but to be honest with you, there were instances where people said, hey, how can we trust that you're going to do this? We've seen the history. We recognize that other things come up. We appreciate this effort, but we really want to make sure that you all mean it. And so we've heard that more than once. There was definitely a kind of hold your breath, wait and see perspective that was shared in those conversations. But 201, everyone was positive about the equity and governance framework. Everyone felt that it was a necessary next step in the continued review of policy and the impact that policy has on residents. So I'll take my time going over each of these bullets. And again, the majority of the feedback you see listed here is directed towards how this tool can be operationalized, not necessarily the framework itself. So as we shared this out, people got very excited and said, hey, here are things we want to see this used towards. I was really excited that a couple of the different boards and commissions we met with actually desired to use it themselves as they framed advisement that they would provide to this council. We also heard an appreciation for council, again, taking this approach and focusing on equity. The slides, the framework graphics that you saw, there was a desire to better illustrate the iterative nature of the framework process. So we recognize you can't fit it all in, but there is a desire to show that it is a reciprocal nature event that framework is demonstrating. There's a desire for the importance of accountability. So again, setting up the tool, developing the measures and metrics are necessary because we want to hold people accountable to the use of this tool. Again, there was a desire to prioritize diverse voices and ongoing engagement. You saw on the previous slide in regards to boards and commissions, we actually had one of our best sessions with Generation Nation. I want to thank the members of Triple E Committee for putting us in contact with the executive director of that group. Those young people had an amazing amount to share in reference to their desire to see this framework utilized. We also recognize that there are other groups that also want to be embedded in this process. Lastly, there's a desire to continually communicate with residents around the use of this tool in you all's decision making. So again, it's important to recognize that moving forward, we feel that council can use this as a tool. And we've offered up examples of ways that could be utilized for short, medium, and long-term goals, including the developing of new policy proposals, reviewing current policies, developing equity indicators, again, recognizing that we need a plethora of data to inform how we measure success with this item, and eventually coming to a place where an equity dashboard could be published and could be readily accessible. I'll mention here that staff is undertaking the work of equity simultaneous to you all's process. So in parallel to the work that is occurring with council, staff is undertaking an equity review itself. In fact, our strategy and budget office is going through a process to embed equity in the budgeting process in this next cycle that you'll hear about next week. There is a continued equity action planning process that's being undertaken by my office in partnership with Human Resources. And so you all are not doing this alone. Staff is also walking with you as we ensure that our organization is in line with the goals that we have for Charlotte. With that, I'll ask if there are any questions.
I'd like to start off with recognition of the Triple E committee members, and we'll ask the three of them to respond and comment on the staff presentation. We'll start with Ms. Ajmira, who is leading the group, followed by Ms. Johnson, who is active around engagement, and Mayor Pro Tem. So, Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. This has certainly been historic work. Thanks to your leadership and your vision to create this committee and to prioritize equity in everything that we do. There are a number of initiatives, plans that Council has adopted. For an example, ASL interpretation. That's something new that we had approved just last year for our deaf community, and how it has truly created and made a difference. Language access plan for our immigrant community. So I can go on, but there has been a number of examples of the work that we have done to truly be inclusive. And I would like to recognize Frederico, Sarah Hazel, and the entire staff for their leadership on this, because this was something that there was no manual about how do we do this. It was truly a team effort. They reached out to community, staff. They also used examples of other cities like Long Beach, Louisville, Kentucky, and so many other cities that have done this in the past. So I'm really excited about this. Throughout this process, Vice Chair Ms. Johnson provided great feedback, along with Mr. Winston, who was a committee member at a time, provided great feedback. And I think if you look at the questions that we have come up with are truly comprehensive on how we tackle equity. So I hope that Council will support this work, and this is just the beginning. This is just the framework. I know there is a lot more work that needs to be followed to really put this into an action. So, thank you.
All right, Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Rios. As Councilmember Ajmira said, this was such great work. It was an honor to be a part of this committee. We do so much work as council members, but there are certain decisions or certain actions that we're a part of that really remind us of the ability to move the needle on certain issues. There's this one, there's a source of income discrimination, there's the NDO, and I really put this up there with that. So I look forward to the council supporting this and us really utilizing this tool and looking at every decision that we consider through an equitable lens. I use the word intentional all of the time. We have to be intentional. We have to be deliberate in really considering the impact that our decisions have. So thank you, Madam Mayor, for the opportunity. It was a great committee. It was impactful, progressive, and I look forward to the continued work. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I echo everything my colleagues just said, and I'd like to thank Mayor Lyles for putting this committee together to do the work. You know, we had some pretty, I'd say me and Fed had some heart-to-heart conversations as it related to this, I think even before the committee was formed, to figure out, okay, yeah, we might agree that there's an equity lens that needs to occur, but what does that even mean? And as we parse things out, those three approaches, you know, the staff-led work that the manager had already been working on and figuring out how to reach out to engage the community at large in a more equitable fashion. But I will say for the folks out there, it could be very staff doesn't like to get into the business of telling council how to go about making their decisions. Even, so, and they dove into this. They dove into this, as my committee members said, walking in hand. We realized the importance of policies. You know, that slide that you put up at the beginning, we are the people here that sit at this dais, make decisions that impact the community at large for generations. And we kind of realize that, yeah, if we don't have some type of guiding principle, some type of equity lens, then we're not really dealing with the issue. So thank you, staff, for being willing to get a bit uncomfortable and working with us on council to figure out how to do our work better. As I see it, for us on council, there are two immediate steps. Vote to adopt and get this policy in place, but then figure out how to put this into our committees. So our committees, we can understand, as Mr. Rios said, how to work or how to incorporate an equity lens or lenses in our respective policy work. I had the pleasure of sitting in every committee meeting last Monday, and to a committee, the question that made it through each committee was, how are we going to put our equity lens to work here? So this is a priority of council, and I look forward to continuing the next steps from that. So thank you.
Thank you. I forgot to mention Willie Ratchford and his team. They have been instrumental in this work, so I didn't want to forget about them, and also Emily in your team, Frederico. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, now this opening it up for discussion. I want to recognize Ms. Mayfield and Mr. Driggs. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I definitely want to congratulate staff on getting here. These are conversations that we've had for many years. We had these conversations years ago when I was serving in my previous capacity. I would also like for my colleagues to consider, as we move forward, hoping that we are in agreement for support to move this forward, recognizing that we also have an opportunity here, because the community doesn't necessarily know some of the limitations we have. Our role regarding when we look at how employees move through that equity lens, and it's shown as it shows up in each department, we have the authority and the ability for hiring and firing of 3 individuals: the city manager, the city clerk, and the city attorney. We have an opportunity to make sure that we clarify our language within the city manager's preview with his review, to make sure that he has the ability, by knowing the clear expectations on his behalf, what our equity goals and expectations are for staff. So that way, we do not put the manager necessarily in a position where staff may not be hitting or exceeding our equity goals, and then we're looking to the manager to say, well, your staff isn't doing X. We have an opportunity to make sure that we clarify our language in upcoming reviews for the city manager, so then he is able to share that with his team, because we do not have that ability. But again, want to thank the committee for this work that you all delved into, and for the leadership to make this conversation get to this point. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, Mr. Driggs.
So I see that Mr. Baker knew I was going to have a legal question and left the room. Patrick, come back.
Okay. Would you like to, Ms. Anderson wants to comment? Would you like to wait until Mr.
No, I
Baker
have another
returns?
question as well. So you commented on the feedback that you got. Hey, Patrick. Who was asked? Like, where did that feedback come from?
Yes, sir. So I'll go back. So we spoke with each one of the boards and commissions listed here. Additionally, we were able to have conversations with the representatives of the community-based organizations listed below.
So I would just submit that there are segments of our community that are not represented there. And if you have unanimity on a topic like this, that makes me wonder whether you asked all the right people. And again, I don't think there's any disagreement about equity, and I'm not questioning that, but I'm saying it would be more helpful if you're telling us what the community thinks, if there was a little bit of diversity in the feedback we got. Even if it was just a question of questioning a provision, nothing this big is that perfectly unanimous. And I would point to slide 7. So is disenfranchised synonymous with African American? Because you've talked about racism and how this is about racism. Here you talk about disenfranchised. There might be a case that there are other people who are disenfranchised as well. So just want to be clear about what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So African Americans have historically been disenfranchised in this community. If you the previous slide showed the Jim Crow era South and the specific impacts that that has had on the accrual of black wealth over time. They are not the entirety of the disenfranchised community here in Charlotte. I would venture to say that disabled persons, persons of Latino and other descents,
exactly.
would also fall into that category.
So we do talk about racism, but we also mean any other disenfranchised person.
Absolutely. So racism is, so we are a member of the Government Alliance on Racial Equity.
Right.
So that alliance, which again, our membership adheres us to their direction, states that the cornerstone of all equity work is based on racism due to the history of this country, specific to the subordination of African Americans.
Understood, but again, disenfranchised. I'd like to think there are other people that probably deserve also some attention. I mean, I look, for example, at how our affordable housing is allocated, and I've never been able to understand exactly whether there are criteria that we establish, like need or deserving or whatever, historically disadvantaged, as to how we assign that housing. It feels like we put the subsidy in, and then it's sort of a first-come, first-served application process. But I think we could study prioritizing in a policy. Do we run the risk of thereby putting other people at a disadvantage? This is similar to some of our other discussions that we've had, particularly, I guess, the CBI, I'm thinking. But is it okay to say we're going to prioritize certain people, or should government never do that?
That's a bit of a loaded word, and you have to have a policy in place that makes it clear exactly what it is that you're trying to accomplish, that that's a legitimate public purpose. Otherwise, it could potentially look like you're choosing winners and losers. But the way it's been put here, I'm comfortable with it, but it is a word that you have to be careful with as you're going forward.
So the public purpose test is the thing that makes it okay in spite of the constitutional equal rights.
That is part and parcel of the discussion. Is there a public purpose? Is there a need for the government to address a particular issue? But you're right. There is an equal protection, what's the word I'm looking for? That needs to be taken into account as you're doing all these things, keeping in mind that some of these, some of the affirmative action programs that have been taken down by the courts have focused on the equal protection clause.
Okay, thank you for that. We all agree about we want equity. I just want to make sure that we do it in a way that's truly inclusive. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had 3 quick points. The first one is, I believe you said some of our committees would be utilizing this framework. I think in order to actually make this effective, all of our committees should be using this framework. All of our everyone should be using this as a lens to double check and keep us honest as it relates to equity. And if we don't do that, and it's just applied here and there, then we run the risk of creating new historical inequities that someone will have to address on a go-forward basis. So that's the first piece. On the slide where you lay out equity and governance framework and council's responsibilities, initiatives, and everything else underneath there, I just want to make sure that we always keep technology and access to internet as a part of these equitable opportunities. And because every box effectively underneath here, there's spaces where if you don't have access to quality high-speed internet, you're not going to be able to engage in a variety of these efforts. And the last piece I'd say is I just want to agree with Councilmember Mayfield that as we, as a body, anyone that we have the opportunity to hire and manage as a part of their annual review, midterm review, if this is really something that we're going to own and buy into, it should be an aspect of that review process. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Bakari?
Thanks. First and foremost, you know, I know you and your team do good work, so I want to recognize a bunch of effort that has gone in to bring us to this point. Thank you. And can you go forward a slide or two? There was one that had some questions on it that I just, there you go. So these guiding questions. I'm going to be interested to see if there's more underneath all of this, or if there is a body of work to be done, because I would say that the real challenge we have here, and Mayor Pro Tem, hopefully you would somewhat agree with me on this point, because we were seeking out an equity lens multiple times over the last 3 years that enabled consistency in our thought, right? I'm of the mindset that I don't believe making equity top of mind is a problem that exists on this council. Literally, almost every conversation is equity-based. In fact, I believe the problem is we apply an equity lens to things that don't always make sense to do so. But the things, and that is bad for the things that require an equity lens because it gets lost in the noise. What I was really hoping to see here, and maybe that it is under the covers or work is planned, it's almost like a starting point of, is this something that Charlotte needs? And oh, by the way, do we need to be cognizant of a measurable, inequitable aspect to it? Is there a disparity that by definition means that we need to take special attention to something that was caused in this form or that? And we can all make arguments on redlining and how that has indirectly crafted all these things. But what we learned, for example, the week or two ago, where we approved the disparity study, the disparity was nowhere what that study said. We were giving more money towards groups. There just wasn't enough availability of them out there. That's where the disparity was. So in my mind, I was hoping this would be the thing that would help us figure out, okay, is this just a general opportunity to do something Charlotte needs and prioritize it? Or do we need to be really cognizant of a disparity that exists, that also how measurably we will impact it? And it's not like the questions where I feel like are the starting point here, which are like, remember equity. We always never forget to remember equity in any conversation we have. We lack the structure to have a really constructive conversation on how we will get to a conclusion on our efforts.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to respond to Mr. Drake's question on those groups. Certainly, I would like to highlight immigrant and refugee communities, and there has been intentional effort done by staff to reach out to those communities, in addition to our Black and Brown communities, and also our disabled community. Terry Bradley and his team did a very extensive work that is not really being presented here, but there has been a lot of gaps in the services that we provide. They are not able to access. For an example, one change that I had mentioned earlier was ASL interpreter for our council meeting. That's just one. But there are so many other disparities in our infrastructure for disabled group that we have looked at. So I think, Mr. Rios, it would help if you could provide that presentation that was actually presented at our committee meeting by Terry Bradley. I thought that was really an eye-opening, for at least for me. But I would like to understand, Mr. Drakes, if there are any groups that you have in mind that potentially staff could reach out to make sure that we are truly being inclusive in this effort. That would help.
The Rotary Club. I mean, just any group that is not presumed as strongly as all of those groups are to be on the same side of the issue. And again, I'm not looking for a fight here. I just think that there is a dialogue that you can't have when everybody is singing like a choir. So I would like to see us consider, for example, the implications of prioritizing which means that somebody else is being deprioritized. And these questions have come up in the courts, they've come up in school admissions, and so we need to be even-handed in terms of offering the benefits that we're talking about to some people and not putting other people at a disadvantage. And so, for example, if we have minority-owned black businesses, there are small non-black businesses that struggle and that have a lot of the same problems. So I would have expected that to be kind of part of the conversation and to at least demonstrate that we had been thoughtful about that. And that's kind of my concern. I think there are people who could look at this and just think, wow, you know, no thought was given to anything other than this.
Yes, I would be interested in Rotary Club's feedback in this process. I know you were given recommendations by the committee on several groups. So if council has specific recommendations of the groups that are not listed here that they would like Federico and his team to reach out to, I think that would be great, so that we are truly getting comprehensive feedback along the way.
All right.
Thank you.
I have Ms. Molina, who has not spoken, followed by the Mayor Pro Tem. Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've actually seen this presentation 2 times because I was on the Equitable Development Commission. And so although we've made a whole lot of very valid points, I think we have to be careful, because one of the things that I've spoken to Mr. Rios about is that we continue to see the idea of equity and diversity widen. The context is constantly widened. And so the people who are more advanced in their understanding, they're ready for intersection. Intersection is a way of saying there are people who belong to multiple groups, and some that don't belong to groups that are actually by default a member of another group. So for an example, a white male who is actually a member of the LGBTQ community, who traditionally wouldn't be considered as someone who would be a protected class, but he now, because he is a member of the LGBTQ community, is actually cross-section, and there could be even other cross-sections in there. So, you know, I remember my sociology professor told me one time, she said, Marjorie, you have to learn to meet people where they are, is what she told me, because I was ready to like take off running. I'm like, this is the way I understand it. So I'm so excited and I'm ready to explain it. And, you know, so I feel like, although I feel like when having a great starting place is where we have to design the idea of equity. And I think we have to then be prepared and malleable in our ideas, and understanding that the context of diversity and what equity means will continue to develop as time goes on. I can remember, you know, once we, at least from my recollection, began to really have the conversation around the LGBTQ community specifically, we've now, you know, really expanded that conversation where the average person who is not even a member has to, you know, if you want to be conscious and you want to be open, you know, you have to be willing to be malleable and understand that there's more context to even that conversation than you may not have been aware of as an outsider. And so, and specifically related to race, ethnicity, and culture are not synonymous. They do not mean the absolute same thing. So when we say Latino, for an example, that's one that top of mind, community that I'm connected to. You can be Black and Latino. You can be Asian and Latino. It's an ethnic population that people practice the same culture, and there's a community, but they're a multi-ethnic community with multiple races. So you can have groups and subgroups. And so I think as we talk about race specifically, where it, you know, pertains to the idea of equity and diversity, we have to remain malleable, because there's just so many contexts that we have to continue to understand. So I'm happy to see a start. I love to see that we have competent stakeholders, and I, you know, I'm sensitive to the idea that, you know, our republic in the process of democracy does demand that we have diverse conversations around what we intend to do. So maybe having someone with a completely different context of what that means from the outside bring that perspective in is something that would help to develop our ideas around what that means. I personally don't believe diversity is representation alone. I feel like diversity is where we have uncomfortably allowed ourselves to look at the lens through someone else's experience, so that's really my comment.
All right, thank you. All right, Mayor Pro Tem?
I think this is the kind of conversation that we wanted to have about this. And to Mr. Bakari's points, I think you're right. Now, we often do use equity lens. This is something that Mr. Rios and I, again, spoke about from the very beginning, right? But we have a subjective lens, right? And as we're dealing with policies, as we're dealing with our work, the challenge was, and is still will continue to be, how can we create an objective process that we can hold each other accountable to say, hey, how are we looking at this, right? Right? As Ms. Molina said, what we're dealing with today might be very different in 5 years, or might be in a nuanced fashion that is different. I bring my experiences to the table, and I might have my equity lens, but that might not be the right lens to look at citywide policy through, because citywide policy has to touch 310 square miles. And so I think that we have to have a tool that is dynamic, right? That is able to be looked at over time and able to be scrubbed. And I think that's kind of what the path is that we're on. As it was saying, sometimes we'll have to answer all of these questions. Sometimes it might be one question that we really need to dive in for a particular decision that we have to make, which I think is why I think is going to be important, that we figure out how to incorporate this in our work so that it is just that, a lens, right? A lens, light passes through it, right? Light passes through it. It doesn't stop it. It doesn't necessarily make it harder for that light to shine through. But that lens is going to effectively color the light. It's going to focus the light. And that's what this tool kind of needs to be. I agree with Mr. Driggs. I think the Rotary Club would actually be a great place to bring this idea. But I think this is a good start. And again, I hope we just continue to be constructive as we move this forward. I do think Mr. Rios and I certainly have had, this was part of the conversation that we had with each other to figure out, we don't want to waste our time here, but we have an awesome opportunity to get something really great done.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I just want to point out again that we have the ASL interpreter, like Councilmember Ashmira has said twice. That's the outcome of this group, so it's really exciting. But let me just say, and we all know this, but as a reminder, that equity is not equality. Equity is being intentional about looking at the disparities. So I think that it's certainly okay to hear from those who are most affected and be unapologetic about that, because and I'll speak for Black folks especially, we're 400 years behind. And these systems continue to be a barrier, and why it's difficult in this city to move upwardly mobile. So I think it's okay to address the problem directly and to be intentional about the tools that are provided, such as asking the question, such as we know that there were only 2% Black contractors or Black vendors in the CBI. So we have to have tools in order to get to try to raise those numbers. So from an equity lens, I think we need to be very, very, again, deliberate and intentional, and know that equity is not equality. It's not meant to be equality. It's meant to give those that have been oppressed for so long an opportunity. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. All right, Mr. Jones.
Okay. So thank you, Mayor and members of council. I guess it's that point in time where I'm seeking direction, okay? So I guess the best way to describe this is something that the Mayor Pro Tem said. Is this going to be a policy that the council adopts? If we go back to the, I guess, violence as a public health crisis, that was something that there was a head nod around the dais, but not something that you adopted, even though the county has a parallel program that's essentially the same. Maybe it's oxymoron. They have a program that is the same as ours. But you did adopt the Safe Charlotte program. So as we go through, we had queued up for maybe as early as the 24th to bring this back to you for a vote to adopt this framework. If that is not where the council wants to be because we need to go out and have more input, then we will do just that. But I guess it's a question's twofold. Is it the will of this council to actually adopt this framework, of official vote on it, or is it not? And then that will help us as we decide what we would do at staff for the next steps.
May I ask the manager, you said adopt or not, but I think that's just the two choices, yes or no. And does that include additional work on either yes or no? I'm just trying to clarify.
Right, no,
what you
I'm
meant.
sorry, I guess I missed the more important thing. So the way that we saw this early on, and that's, when we think about EEE, it's actually environment, engagement, and equity. And there were topics that were discussed at this committee across all of those. One of the outputs of it, or eventually outcome, is this equity framework. And so the concept would be that committee goes away because the framework is built into all of the remaining 4 committees. And then at that point, there may be additional discussions about how you measure success. So I just need to know, is it the concept that we bring this back to you for you to vote to adopt this framework, and then we build on that? And that's, we just wanted some clarity on that, and when would be the proper timing for that?
So you heard what Mr. Jones has said, and I had Ms. Watlington next.
That was my question as well. That's what I would like to do. I want to adopt and improve as soon as we can.
All right, Ms. Etch, well, I don't think we got to get some guidance. Let's let people speak first, and then we'll come back if we have to, raise our hands at that point. Ms. Ajmira?
So I agree with Ms. Watlington. I would like to proceed with adopting and approving this. However, Mr. Drake does raise a valid question about reaching out to the groups that we have not reached out to. So before the 24th, if we can have Mr. Rios provide us inputs from the Rotary Club or any other groups that council think we haven't reached out to, that would help. And that was really the charge of the committee, was to build a framework and expand our work on this, on individual policy item that each committee will work on. Isn't that right, Madam Mayor?
That was the idea, that this framework would be used to apply to the committee's work so that you would have this as a guide to go through those projects and programs and other actions that you are taking to say, does this work? What are we trying to, and I know the first one is what is the policy seeks to accomplish, so that there's clarity to talk about, well, is it policy? What benefits? What is, in the terms of the equity lens. So it was, and that would mean the 4 committees would actually use this guide or this lens to address the work that's being done. And that's to come back and say, if you report out something, it says we took it through this test.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we don't amend, it doesn't mean that we don't count. We probably need to set some metrics and things, but I think that would be done at the committee level.
Yeah, and that was the intent. So committee came up with a very broad framework that could be applied to everything that we do. It's just like environment aspect of the work, right? So environment, engagement, and equity, there were committee also came up with engagement toolbox that is not presented here, but it actually takes equity into consideration to make sure that we are being intentional about engaging all our community members, or having equity lens in our engagement. So I would like us to proceed with that. And if, Mr. Rios, if you could provide us feedback from Rotary at least a couple of days before the 24th, so we can reach out to you if you have additional questions. Thank you.
That might be a tall order, but I think one.
He said, he did nod his head.
I understand that, but I think that we want to be practical about what amount of work, and maybe it's something that's how I would do it, a plan for doing it, instead of having a plan that's completed, okay? All right, so I had Ms. Mayfield followed by the Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Rios, question. We move forward, there's a motion, it's approved for us to move forward with this framework. That does not preclude additional conversations, does it, as we continue to flush out how we utilize this? Because I want to make sure that what I heard from my colleague wasn't saying, let's pause to continue to add individuals into this conversation. We can, as a council, if we so choose, move, and I guess this is a question either for Mr. Rios or for Mr. Jones. We can move forward with a recommendation of approval, second, or recommendation of denial, whatever the recommendation is. But if we move to approve it, you still will have the ability to continue to outreach, whether it was to the organization that mentioned or other individuals within our community, correct?
That is correct. So just to reiterate something that I stated earlier in the presentation, it's you all's tool. So it's at your discretion for use, continued amendment, revision, to a point that Councilmember Molina made earlier. We're never hitting the mark on equity.
Right.
There's no target we're ever going to magically hit the bullseye on. It's an iterative process. There is constantly somebody being disenfranchised or left behind. And so it's a necessity to constantly review.
And that's what I wanted to clarify. So for me, us moving forward gives the ability to codify the language that we have been using with conversations that's coming before us anyway. We use the language of an equity lens. We now have the language that codifies what does that lens look like. Here are some metrics for us to identify as we move forward, recognizing that as a city, as with these challenges across the nation, we cannot turn a blind eye to legislative, historic policy language that created challenges that we are still facing today. And it is through legislative policy language that we have the ability to attempt to address some of these issues, and we are that policy-making body. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. So the 12 of us up here, obviously we have relationships with many different organizations, but even between the 12 of us, we don't have relationships with all of the organizations out there. You know, in fact, that is one of the issues with equity, right? You don't know the issue until you know the issue, right? So I would vote that we should adopt this, but we should continue, again, from a living standpoint, to continue to outreach, right? So why don't we get into our committees? What staff has done, they've kind of housed all of our appointed boards and commissions, right? That help advise us on policy areas. They're made up of citizens who are parts of different subgroups in our community. And maybe we work through our committees to formulate those questions that we ask those appointed boards and commissions. Who are the folks that we should be talking to? Who are the folks that we need to be thinking about, right? When we're thinking about bicycle infrastructure policy, who should we be talking to? When we're talking about recruiting businesses, right, here, who should we be talking to? What are the questions that we should be asking, right? And so if we kind of use that committee approach and use our tools as we adopt this, we can have, and as we build this dashboard, we can have sort of an encyclopedia of how to apply this lens to different policy areas and different decisions and different groups that we're going to encounter. Because if we try to go around this dais and figure out all the groups that we should be talking to and all the angles that we need to take, we're limiting ourselves. So I would suggest we adopt this, approve this, and then again, work it through our committees, because each one has at least a dozen boards and commissions. And those dozen boards and commissions are populated by several different people. Hopefully, that's how we get a representative kind of touch base with everybody in our community. That would be my suggestion.
All right. Mr. Bakari?
Yeah. To that point, for me, I'll just speak for myself. I don't believe it's about engaging more external groups, personally. I think it's more of, will that be nice and helpful? I don't expect to get a lot because we're building something that hasn't been built before.
How to apply the lens.
Yeah, but what I think, the reason I think this is, unless I'm missing something, but it all seems to be here, and what we'd be approving is theoretically in front of us right now, right? With maybe a little bit of diligence that was done before, is essentially a picture that says staff, council decision-making, and residents tied to some very high-level generic things. I mean, that's a picture. There's another picture of our council committees and initiatives, and that we use data. And then there's a 6-question guiding lens tool that starts with, what are we seeking to accomplish, and ends with, will it reduce disparities? Like, in my world, when we make a framework, it is not, I mean, it is something that is material. It's something you use every day, and it passes a use test. Yeah. And even in the practical application, and I remember this, around speed humps. Okay, so if we tactically took that and said, well, what were some of the historic reasons why we had speed humps and the petition process? It wasn't that always it was about making it hard and those who had access had rights to it. It was about the fact that everyone in every neighborhood, there's somebody that hates anything. And if we have a backlog, it showed us that the whole neighborhood was for it, right? Rather than you put it in because 6 people said they wanted it, and all of a sudden there was, an uprising of people who didn't want speed humps. So my point is, maybe there's things that have changed over time with that. What I'm looking for is an actual framework where we sat down, and it wasn't me trying to make an ad hoc case last week to the very point that was just raised up. It was that there are 2% of our community that are Black-owned businesses. But the reality is we've spent 2.5% of our budget with them, more than there are. The disparity isn't the fact that how we as a government deploy money, it's that that's a really low percentage. And why isn't there more? But that's not our job. But that is our ability in outside networks to be able to create. So this is very complex. I think we can go ahead and vote on this as it is today, and I'll vote no. And we'll move on and it'll be done. Or there's an opportunity to make something here that enables us to have some tough dialogues. And maybe we get to something really, really important. But that's going to be more than what you see here. If we're looking to check a box, then vote it in now. If somebody wants to get serious, I'll get serious and work on it. So it's something we can use that's real.
All right, Ms. Watlington?
Sure. I think, to reiterate, it's not an either or. I think we can do both, and so I move that we do that. Let's move in the direction of adopting and continue to improve it and incorporate the comments that we receive around the dais.
All right, Mr. Driggs?
Yeah. Well, for one, I'd like to mention, at the last meeting of the Transportation Planning and Development Committee, I pointed out to my colleagues that there is a burden on all of us, since there is no longer a EEE committee, to keep that in mind. I see the potential that we carry on our business and don't realize that we all have an E there. So I get that, and I'm on board with that. I think we're missing a great opportunity to have a much bigger and robust community conversation instead of taking interest groups, again, who share a lot of the same priorities and really come to grips with some of this stuff. I mean, this isn't that simple. We are a diverse community. We're still almost 50%, I guess, white. And I think there is a conversation that could lead to a better result. So that's a feeling of mine. The difficulty I have right now is that I would like to see that happen before I vote for this. So could I vote for it right now? I don't know. But then I'm in the tough position, and it has happened so many times, when I'm basically in support, like even on the UDO, 2.1, you know, and I really had a problem with that. I worked hard to get the rest of that done. And I don't like the idea of being classified as a guy who doesn't believe in equity or as somebody who isn't concerned about, like there's no middle ground here when we vote on it. So I would prefer that we spend a little more time and that we have a more genuine community conversation before we adopt this. If we go to other people after we adopt this and say, hey, let's talk, you know, and you can tell us whether you think we ought to change this, what does that feel like? You know, we've adopted it already. Now you have a chance to tell us whether you think we should change it. Not the same as letting them participate earlier.
Ms. Anderson?
So, Mr. Rios, could you go to that slide where you listed all of the committees and community members who had and provided input? So, Mr. Driggs, we have 13 communities and committees here that provided input that do represent a swath of the city of Charlotte, and not simply just a pure concentration in one specific area.
If I had heard a mix in the feedback that we received, other than this utter uncontroversial unanimity, I would have been more confident, because I don't think the topic is as one-sided as that. So I'm not just looking at those names, but also at the characterization of the feedback. I believe that there is a more robust conversation where we need to come to grips with some pretty painful truths that we have just sidestepped. So, you know, we can go ahead and adopt this, and then we'll see how applicable it is. But it isn't, this is not diverse. And for it to be diverse, again, I would have had to hear, you know, people objecting to certain provisions, people raising certain issues, people raising questions like I just did about what does prioritize mean? What does disadvantage mean? I would have preferred to say support rather than prioritize, because to me, prioritize immediately connotes that someone else is being deprioritized. Just a suggestion, but that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. It seems to me we could have explored a lot of this further, and I was not part of the development of this as such, so I could have raised these points earlier, but I really didn't know. Thank you.
All right, so I know, let's just take a moment here, because we've gotten a lot of suggestions, but what I have heard is that there's likely to be a majority of council members that want to see this adopted as presented, and that in 2 weeks, we would be doing the adoption if we put it on the next business agenda. What I've also heard is that there's some concern, and I don't think I share it, Mr. Driggs, because I think this community has had discussions around race and equity for many years. Think about community building initiative, think about all of the work that the foundation has done, all the mobility studies have been a part of this. So I really believe that there are opportunities for further discussion, but the discussions have been held in this community since Keith Lamont Scott, and a lot of this has been addressed in this way. It's not to say that they are all in agreement, and I understand that. That's clearly a recognition, especially in this time period that we're having in this country. And I have to commend, our city is not having those kind of discussions, and perhaps because we did start 10 years ago with community building initiative and programs like that. But I guess the other thing that I'm hearing is, and this was a little bit, it goes back to what Ms. Sajmira said, when we started talking about this, it was to take this not as gospel, but to take it into a committee and to ask a committee, how would you deal with this in housing, safety, and how would you deal with it in economic development? I'm not so sure you want to have a consistent framework, but I think the question was, and maybe if, I just want to check in with the committee, that the discussion was, take this as a framework, and then take it to each council committee and say, how would you assess the work that you're doing against this framework? And it wasn't a blanket across the board, and then that we would come back. I see this as a continuous feed of information and the opportunity to do some of this work. But I also think that I hear from members around this dais that they're ready to move forward. So we may not all agree on how to move forward, but I believe that the committee's recommendation was to move forward through the council committees to look at their work and engage the framework. And I want to check with the committee members and do I see a yes there? Right.
Well, point of order, is there a motion on the floor?
There is not a motion. I don't think that we had one. I heard someone make a motion, but I don't know that I had a second.
I
So if-
second it.
I'm sorry, I did.
We did a clarification of if we were actually moving forward with a motion tonight.
Right. And so let's go back to that. If we want, if there is a vote to move this forward on the 24th, or I think the other option is to move forward as the committee's recommendation, which I don't know if those are separate or not. So, wait, I can't. Okay. I think that everyone was talking about, the original motion maker was Ms. Watlington. And again, let's go to Ms. Watlington and say, what is your motion?
Yes,
And then
ma'am.
we can decide if there is a second. And then we'll know a little bit, have a little bit better understanding.
Yeah,
Ms.
so-
Watlington.
So I move that we accept the committee's recommendation to come back with intent to approve on the, give me the date? On the
24th.
24th, and that we continue to improve the policy and the framework through the work of the committees as requested.
Okay, so there is a motion to accept the committee's recommendation, which would mean that this would go.
Second.
All right, and we have a second. All right, is there any further discussion? All right, Ms. Sajmir, or Ms. Watlington, Ms. Sajmir, Ms.
thank you,
Sajmir,
Mayor.
or Mr. Driggs?
So, Mr. Manager, do you need an action from us? I think it's pretty clear that majority of us want to move forward on 24th. So do you need an action from the council today?
Yes, he
Yeah.
asked for one.
Yeah, so we've had some hits and misses over the last few weeks about what should be on an agenda.
Got it.
And for me, when it's something like this, having an affirmation from 6 of you is very helpful.
So I will support Ms. Watlington's motion here to move forward. However, I would like to get feedback from the Rotary Club that Mr. Drakes had referred to earlier. I think that is important. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Molina.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. And so now that we've clarified what the actual motion is, I better understand where we are. I actually didn't realize that we needed a motion until you just explained that, so thank you very much, because I, intended an update. But I actually agree with my colleague here, Council Member Ajmera, in the idea of equity. What we don't need to do is to have any of our community members feeling like they're left out.
Right.
And so I would like to make sure that we do our due diligence in saying that if there's something being brought to our attention to say that, hey, I feel like we need to bring more stakeholders to the table and have those voices heard, then I don't know, Mr. Rios, is that time constraint too small, or is this something that we're asking that may be too much? Can you give me some feedback on where you are with
Yeah.
this?
Can I help you, Fed?
Go ahead,
Okay.
please, sir.
So, words matter.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Words matter, and I'm not 100% sure, Fed, that universally everybody said this is the greatest thing in the world, right?
Yeah.
And so I think reaffirming with and that's just a little message I got from Sarah, so thank you, Sarah. And then the other thing is that I think it's a lot to put on Fed that in 2 weeks he has to now all of a sudden have a brand new community engagement effort. I just don't think with all the other things he's doing that's fair to Fed. But I just didn't want Fed to just come out and try to be responsive. So 2 things, Fed. Can you help us a little bit about the
Sure.
feedback? And
Yep.
then I just think, and respecting the council, it's a lot to ask to all of a sudden have a brand-new engagement process in 2 weeks.
Well, before he answers, can I just,
Hold on. Let's everybody be heard. And I think the question was to let Federico
well, before
talk a
he
little bit
answers, can I
about
just
this, and then we'll
piggyback
come-
off of that?
I'm sorry.
Why are we putting that on him? Everything we do is subject to public engagement. Why don't we just say, members of the public, if you have comment, reach out to your council members?
I think it's a little bit more to get I think the diversity of opinion, it might be a little bit tougher, but that's just an opinion of mine. Let's see.
Yeah, so I'll share, though I recognize that bottom bullet probably shows a lot of unanimity amongst groups, there is a great diversity of opinion amongst boards and commissions. So recognizing that they are individuals that have been appointed for the most part by you all, they reflect the diversity that this body has in opinion. And so we did hear, but most of the pushback was not around equity. The pushback was around, are you really going to commit to this? Is this really what you're going to do? And are you going to prioritize it through your decision-making processes?
Okay, so that's the feedback. We have a motion on the floor and a second, and Mr. Driggs wanted to speak to it.
I would like to suggest that we amend the motion simply to schedule a vote on that day and without the bit that says that we adopt or approve the committee recommendation. That's prejudicial to any work that we might do in the meantime. We should just plan to vote on this on the 24th and then take into account that we may talk about it and maybe there are some changes that get made. So that is in response also to your point. Let's leave it open for discussion until the 24th. I don't know that we need to approve or otherwise respond. Can't this group just say, yes, we're going to vote on the 24th?
If you say a substitute motion to do that?
I offered an amendment. I think it's an amendment to the motion.
Does the motion maker accept the amendment?
No.
Okay,
What was the answer?
no.
All right, I'll make a substitute motion.
All right, a substitute motion is that we vote to approve this on the
24th.
On the 24th with.
That's it.
No, not approve it.
That we
To
vote on
discuss
it. The motion is that we vote on this on the 24th without any current prejudice as to what it is exactly at that time or what the outcome of that vote is. We will just plan to vote on this on the 24th.
So to put it on the agenda for the 24th for a vote.
It's on the agenda, and we will vote then.
All right, do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
All right, we have a second to that motion. All right, because we have a substitute motion on the floor, all in favor of the substitute motion, which is to put the agenda item on the agenda as an agenda item. That's what the motion is.
For
Did I
action
say
on the
that?
24th.
So would that be a committee's recommendation? Like, what would the agenda item say?
Well, the point is, we know that the committee will then, is known to have recommended it. We're not taking that away, but we're not, on
Got
this
it. So we are
occasion,
not
agreeing with the committee. We
Oh.
would agree with the committee on the 24th when presumably the majority will vote to adopt.
But
Excuse me, point of order, that's not materially
Point of order,
different.
I don't understand what we're doing, to put something on the agenda without a staff recommendation or a committee. Ordinarily, Mr. Riggs, we would have a committee recommendation stated with the staff follow-up. I can't just say, put on the equity engagement framework strategy.
Right,
It
it's
has
not
to have
materially
something.
different from the
And that's-
original
And I don't
motion.
know how to do
Which
that.
is the same issue we're having right now, approving it. I don't know what it is. It's like
But you're not
6 questions.
You're not voting to.
But we're saying we don't know what it is, but we're going to support it.
I don't think they said support, Mr. Bakari, said put it on the agenda.
All
and
you
I think
said is
there's a
put it on the
write-up.
agenda?
But we said adopt the
Oh, well,
committee
I
recommendation.
don't want to accept.
On the committee's recommendation, right. Then you can amend or change the
Yeah, you
committe's
could-
recommendation at that point, but it is the committee's recommendation that's moving forward. Okay, let's just be clear on that. That was the
I just
motion
don't know.
maker's
It's fine.
opinion.
Whatever.
So the committee's recommendation goes forward based upon the original motion, so let's go.
I withdraw my second.
Okay.
I withdraw.
Let's just go. Let's just go.
All right, so there was a substitute motion with a second.
Withdraw the
Mr.
substitute
Bakari has,
motion.
with Mr. Driggs and Mr. Bakari have withdrawn that motion, so now we have the motion on the floor from the city clerk. Would you please read the motion?
The original motion, correct?
Yes, correct.
We accept the committee's recommendation and come back with the intent to approve on the 24th and continue to approve.
All right, that was the motion. All right? Everybody heard it? Please raise your hands if your hand in favor of that motion. 5, 6, 7 yeses, so the motion passes. All right, Mr. Jones, do you have enough sufficient to work on
Yes.
it? The opposition?
Oh, thank you.
All right, yes, 2. All right, thank you very much. Okay, we now have a closed session, or do we need to?
You want to do it at the end, Mayor?
We only have a short agenda. We have to go downstairs. We still have the ceremonial parts of our agenda to do. Is that acceptable to do the closed session at the end? Will we lose anyone? Okay.
So why don't we go with it now then?
All right, so we can't lose another person. I think we're going to go ahead. Mr. Baker, would you please read the motion to go into closed session?
Yes, I need a motion to go into closed session to establish or instruct the public body's staff and negotiating agents concerning the position taken by or on behalf of the public body in negotiating the price or other material terms of a contract or proposed contract for the acquisition of real property by purchase, option, exchange, or lease pursuant to GS 143-318-11A5.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. All right, now we're going to have, as soon as Ms. Birch gets her
Thank you.
Deepest regrets and our apologies that we had several items to review earlier and did not manage our time well. And we appreciate your patience. And for those that did not have a chance to participate and be recognized earlier this evening, my apologies from all of us here at the dais. And we hope that you'll still continue to work on issues, but I also understand that we said to you that we would start at a reasonable time, and we did not. So thank you very much. I want to call the November 10th, 2022 council meeting to order, and I'd like to begin with our introduction, starting with the city clerk.
Stephanie Kelly, city clerk.
Marjorie Molina, Charlotte City Council, District 5.
Lawana Mayfield, council member at large.
Marcus Jones, city manager.
Vi Lyles, mayor.
Braxton Winston at large and serving as mayor pro tem.
Good evening, Ed Driggs, District 7.
Tarek Bakari, 6.
Good evening. My name is Victoria Watlington, and I'm representative for District 3.
All right.
Dimple Rajmiro at large.
All right. We begin our meetings with an invocation or an expression that we use to solemnize our deliberations and our proceedings. We follow that with a pledge of allegiance. Tonight, I want to recognize Mayor Pro Tem for his expression.
Thank you. As today is Indigenous Peoples Day, I would like to recognize that we are in historical Cherwa, Catawba, and Sugaree land. And I'll take a passage adapted from a person named Diane Climhage, who put together this prayer in respect to Indigenous Peoples Day. We look at our world and praise it for the diversity all around us. We give thanks for the gift of relationships, our connections with people, animals, and the land. We ask for help to see the differences in diversity as strengths, to help us listen and understand, to meet one another with wonder and anticipation. We ask for love without expectation, to be revealed in the way of reconciliation and guide us to the right relationships with all living things. We ask to be led to understand how Indigenous peoples have been and continue to be profoundly harmed by settler people and institutions. We ask to be led to repent when we as settlers deny indigenous peoples respect, dignity, and fullness of life. We ask for help to listen compassionately, to speak humbly, and to act justly. We ask for help to seek the peace, justice, and reconciliation that is desired among all of God's children. We give thanks for all mercy and grace. Amen.
All right. If you'll please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have several awards and recognition. I think that Mayor Pro Tem did a great job introducing and helping us ground ourselves for this evening's meeting, but I would also like for him to read a proclamation that we have in honor of Indigenous People Day.
Thank you. Whereas through the centuries, American Indians have shared their knowledge of land and resources while continuing to play a role in the development of the city of Charlotte, the state of North Carolina, and the nation, and that North Carolina is home to more than 122,000 American Indians and has 8 historic tribes legally recognized by the state of North Carolina: the Kohari, Eastern Band of Cherokee, the Hilawa Saponi, the Lumbee, Meherrin, Okanichi Band of Saponi, and Waccamaw Sion. And whereas the city of Charlotte enjoys a positive relationship with American Indian citizens, recognizes and encourages the acknowledgement of historic contributions and sacrifices of indigenous people, and respects the cultural and economic contributions that American Indians have made. And whereas the city of Charlotte promotes the closing of the equity gap for indigenous peoples through policies and practices that reflect the experiences of indigenous peoples, ensure greater access and opportunity, and honor the nation's indigenous roots, history, and contributions. And whereas Indigenous Peoples Day was proposed in 1977 by a delegation of Native nations to the United Nations sponsored International Conference on Discrimination Against Indigenous Populations in the Americas. Therefore, I, Alexander Lyles, Mayor of Charlotte, do hereby proclaim October 10th, 2022 as Indigenous Peoples Day.
Is Rebecca Leclerc here? I hope that the chair of the Metropolitan Native American Association will accept our regrets at not being on time in order to do this and have this proclamation read. So again, our apologies. The next item that we have is a proclamation. I'd like to ask Councilmember Molina to read for us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to start first by saying, soy la concejal Marjorie Molina del Distrito 5, el distrito con mayor diversidad de toda nuestra ciudad de Charlotte. Entonces, I'm going to read the proclamation on behalf of our city. Whereas in September 1968, 52 years ago, Congress and President Lyndon B. Johnson proclaimed National Hispanic Heritage Week. In 1988, 32 years ago, Congress and the President Ronald Reagan expanded the celebration of the Hispanic presence in the United States of America to a month-long commemoration. And whereas every year the United States Congress and the White House call for public officials, educators, librarians, and all Americans to observe National Hispanic Heritage Month with appropriate ceremonies, activities, and programs. And whereas, according to the Office of the U.S. Census, Mecklenburg County is home to 170,000 Latinos. The City of Charlotte recognizes the extraordinary contributions made to this community by immigrants, residents, and citizens of Latino origin. Now, therefore, I, Marjorie Molina, on behalf of our beautiful mayor, it's still Mayor Lyles, they're telling me, okay? Sorry. I can't say I feel okay. The mayor of Charlotte does hereby proclaim the month of September 15th through October 15th, 2022 as Hispanic Heritage Month in Charlotte and commend its observance to all citizens.
Councilmember Molina, would you please, I'm sorry, Mayor Molina, would you please take this to the Raphael and Natalia, who are representing the local nonprofit organization dedicated to celebrating Latino culture and identifying by commemorating every Latin American nation's Independence Day. If you would present them with that proclamation, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephanie.
She's right in the way.
All right.
Turn around.
You're fine.
Ms. Molina, Mayor Molina, would you turn around, please? So that we can get this done.
Yeah.
Stephanie's got it. There we are. Thank you very much. Our final proclamation. Whereas church world services and crop began as a way to share our country's abundance of resources with those facing poverty and hunger following World War II. And today we're working towards eradicating hunger and poverty, as well as providing disaster relief around the world. That crop hunger walks are an important part of a community life for more than 1,000 cities and towns in the United States, bringing people together, different faiths, diverse cultures, and all age groups. Since 1979, the Charlotte Crop Hunger Walk has raised over $9.2 million to help bring help and hope to people in need around the world, and contributed over $2.3 million to fight hunger and poverty in our own community. 25% of the money raised by the Charlotte Crop Walk will be distributed to Loaves and Fishes, Friendship Trays, Crisis Assistance Ministry, and Second Harvest Food Bank of Metropolitan for the purposes of fighting poverty and ending hunger. The 44th Annual Charlotte Crop Hunger Walk will be held October 16th, 2022, beginning at 1:30 p.m. at Charlotte Memorial Stadium to help our community become aware and take actions about hunger, its causes locally and globally. Now, therefore, I, Vi Alexander Lyles, Mayor of Charlotte, proclaim October 16, 2022 as Charlotte Crop Walk Day and commend its observance. Get your tennis shoes and your comfy clothes and go out and walk in our crop walk. Thank you, everyone, for that. All right, the next items that we have on our agenda are public hearings. We have a public hearing and decision on the Battle of McIntyre's Farm Monument Historic Landmark designation. Do we have any speakers, Madam Clerk? With no speakers? And do we move to close the public hearing and adopt the ordinance with an effective date of October the 10th, designating the structure known as Battle of McIntyre's Farm Monument and associated parcels as a historic landmark?
Move to close and adopt.
Second.
We have a motion to close and adopt. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please raise your hands if you're in favor of the motion. Let's see, we have 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. Thank you very much. The next item is item number 10, a public hearing and decision on the Frank's House Historic Landmark designation. Conduct a public hearing to consider this as a historic landmark and to adopt an ordinance with an effective date of October 10th, 2022, designating the property known as Frank's House as a historic landmark. Are there any speakers? No, ma'am. There are no speakers. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing and adopt the ordinance for the Frank's House as a historic landmark?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor, please raise your hands. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. The next item is item number 11, a public hearing and decision on the Williams Memorial Presbyterian Church Wall and Marker Historic Landmark designations. We have a public hearing to consider this as a historic landmark designation and to adopt an ordinance with an effective date of October the 10th, designating the structures known as Williams Memorial Presbyterian Church Wall and Marker as historic landmarks. Do we have any speakers, Madam Clerk? Hearing no speakers, do we have a motion to close the
Motion to
public
approve.
hearing and adopt the ordinance for the historic
Move to
landmarks?
close and adopt.
We have a motion, is there a second? We have a second, is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor, please raise your hands. And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now have the city manager's report.
No report.
There's no report from the city manager. The next item that we have on our agenda is item 13. Action is approve the Budget and Governance and Intergovernmental Relations Council's Committee's recommendations to amend Rule 28 of the Rules of Procedure for the Charlotte City Council specific to council's committee meetings. I'm going to recognize Dimple Ashmere, the chair of the Budget, Governance, and Intergovernmental Relations Committee, as well as to give her report on the item that's recommended.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the committee made a recommendation to approve city attorney's recommendation, which is to allow virtual option for the committee meetings, but not have a virtual option for council meetings. That's in a nutshell.
All right, I think everyone is very familiar with this discussion, and so the question that I have, is there any discussion, or we have a committee recommendation? Ms. Ashmere, are you making a motion to accept the committee's recommendation?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion to approve the committee's recommendation and a second. We'll now begin discussion. Let's see, where would we start with discussion? Ms. Watlington?
Okay, real quick for me, I think I've spoken at length of where I stand on this. I would support virtual options for anything. I will be supporting the motion tonight. I think that we'll probably be having this conversation again when some other town in North Carolina says they figured it out and they didn't get stumped, but for now, I'm fine with where we are. I do have a question in regards to the other items that were outstanding, but we can circle back to that after the vote, because I know there were some other items that were outstanding from the Budget and Governance Committee.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bakari?
Let me check if I got any questions on this one. I'll pass, thank you.
Mr. Driggs?
Pass.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I do believe this council should consider, when it comes to the legislative agenda, putting a virtual option for business meetings in that discussion when that time is right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Mayfield?
No, ma'am.
All right. Ms. Johnson?
Yes, we got a memo from the city attorney earlier today with some amendments. Mr. Baker, can you, one of your recommendations, it seemed that you could support virtual business meetings if the council members weren't a part of the vote, if it were controversial or something. Can you give an update on your recommendation?
So there was some discussion generally about participation, and I want to be clear about this. Not voting, so not being counted for purposes of a quorum and not voting, and whether or not we could have a public participation option, a virtual public participation option. That is an area at which I can't tell you for sure whether you can or you can't. But I can tell you that that's a different legal analysis and review than if it's a council member who was voting virtually when there isn't a statewide state of emergency. That's something that I know some other communities have discussed about potentially going to council or to the General Assembly to get clarity on that. But there's also a question as to whether or not that would even count as part of the official meeting, again, if you're not being counted as present and certainly not being allowed to vote in that situation. So it's a different legal analysis, different than the question that I think was asked at the committee level.
Oh, okay. Well, I would say, Mayor, that we're missing 4 council members, it looks like, and I don't know that we'll have 6 either way. I mean, we can certainly take the vote, but if you want to defer this until we can get some information from maybe a state interpretation or something on if we can conduct these meetings legally, I think that would be appropriate.
There won't be a state interpretation of it. I mean, the law is the law. If you're talking about asking for specific authority, that's part of the legislative committee's purview.
Okay. Well, then, yeah, I guess okay, let me hear what else the other council members have to say.
Ms. Molina?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the only thing I want is to just be clear with the motion that that's currently on the floor, to make sure that, so we're talking about committee meetings only and not business meetings at the current time. That's what we're discussing at this particular moment.
That's correct.
Okay. And is that something that we'll be discussing in the future, or is that something that we're voting on tonight?
We would vote on it tonight. It's on the agenda for approval.
This is it.
This is,
I mean, we've discussed this
It's on
3
item,
times.
it's item 13.
Yeah.
It will come back.
Then I'd like to say,
You just wait till Greensboro starts having vacancies, we'll have the discussion again. By that time, the questions will be 12, let's go to 18, 24, 30. Okay, we will be voting on the committee's recommendation tonight. It's on the agenda.
okay, which is committee meetings only?
Yes.
Okay.
Committee meetings virtually, council meetings in person.
In person, okay.
Okay. Ms. Ajmira, any further comment?
No, I think we've had enough discussion on this topic.
almost, right. So can I make a substitute motion then?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to, no, I'm sorry.
All right, here. Now it's Marjorie's turn tonight.
Rooting it on? I was more rooting it on.
There you go.
Okay, I'll hear it. Please continue. Keep it brief. We don't have much time.
Okay.
I want to make a substitute motion that we allow virtual business, the committee's recommendation in addition to virtual council meetings within the attorney's recommendations. So if that's, that we're not voting, let's see, okay, I can't.
What is the attorney's recommendation?
So that hasn't been discussed by the council.
Accept the recommendation of the B, E, and G committee and to direct the city attorney to prepare an amendment to the council rules of procedures to allow for virtual public participation in city council meetings.
Second. All right, and do we have a definition of public participation in the city council meeting?
Well,
Madam,
definitely.
I would ask our attorney.
Okay, well, okay.
What is the definition of public participation in a meeting?
The discussions that have generally been held is about citizens participating, rather than coming down here to speak for 2 minutes, being able to do that virtually. That's been the discussion. But when you open it up to citizens, that would be all citizens. And then the question then becomes, if a council member wasn't able to attend a meeting, could they also speak on an item like they could be as a citizen, since they're not actually in the meeting for purposes of quorum or voting?
Would they be identified in the minutes as council member or citizen? Would they be identified in the minutes
So
of the
that's,
meeting?
so if
I mean,
this
what are the
motion,
rules?
no, they would be as any citizen. You know, if Patrick Baker spoke on behalf of an item, it would be recorded by the clerk as Patrick Baker spoke for 3 minutes on an item.
That's within my rights.
That's it.
Okay. All right.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I can finish.
We got a motion and a second.
We have a motion and a second on the agenda, so are you speaking to the motion? Your motion?
Substitute motion.
Yes, are you
Yeah,
speaking
well,
to that?
I'll wait.
Yes.
I'll let the others.
No, go ahead. You've got the floor.
Mayor Pro Tem, I'll defer. Go ahead.
All right, we're not going to defer. We're going to either
Okay,
talk
fine, I'll say what I'll say.
move around. I
Fine,
mean,
let me
we've done
say.
this all, we've
I
talked
don't
about
feel,
this.
you all know how I feel. We've proven that the work can be done. This is about the work. And I think that it allows equitable access when we had public meetings for the public to participate and also for council members. So I feel in 2022, to not allow virtual meetings is a step backwards. The law does state that we have the ability to determine the place and time for our meetings, and I understand your conservative approach, so that's why I made that substitute motion, that way. And if it's that, if you can, what the substitute motion is, if you can, get that information, but I don't feel like we should go backwards. We've proven for the last, over 2 years that virtual meetings does get the work done.
All right, recognize Ms. Watlington, Mayor Pro Tem, and then Mr. Driggs.
Thank you. Two quick things, just real quick. I heard you say the legislative agenda. This motion does not include adding something to the legislative, okay. And then the other question that I had, oh, not a question. I just wanted to say, I do think that it's appropriate to allow the citizens to be able to speak virtually. I think that did tremendous good for us to allow folks to be able to participate in those public hearings from a virtual standpoint. So I really like that, and I think that's a good add. So I'll be supporting that.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. So just to clarify, the motion has two parts, is to adopt the work that the committee has done and put that to bed. I think it is clear, from talking with Mr. Baker and reading a bunch of blog posts and articles from the UNC School of Government, that counting virtual council members to a quorum and counting them to vote could potentially put the city's business at harm, and we don't want to do that. But to Ms. Johnson's point, I think it would not be a good thing if we just pretended to ignore all the things that we learned during the state of emergency. We know things are different now. When we talk about communicable diseases, first of all, the way the laws are set up right now, if somebody is sick with COVID, the flu, or anything else, a council member is, then there are two choices that we have, is to come in here and sit at the dais and potentially get a whole bunch of people sick, and participate, and represent, as Ms. Johnson said, represent the people that voted us in, as they want us to do on policy issues, or we can not. We can just stay home, and that doesn't seem like the most valuable use of our resources when we know that we can participate in a virtual setting. So I think this motion allows us to put one item to bed. It allows Mr. Baker to do some work and come back to us, and then it allows us to deliberate over what is brought to us, and still allows, again, for us to take the two-part approach of going to the legislature, if we so desire, with a coalition of potentially other folks from around the state, to ask for a different set of legislation. So I think this option really does kind of minimize the risk, and is a compromise approach to moving forward. So I hope my colleagues will support the substitute motion.
Mr. Driggs?
I just want to clarify, the substitute motion says approve this and do what? What's the other part of the substitute motion?
I will
Allow the citizens to participate.
to direct the city attorney to prepare an amendment to the council rules of procedure to allow for virtual public participation in city council meetings.
So that's not something your committee talked about at all, is it?
Nope.
So we have a recommendation out of committee here.
And a substitute motion.
And then we have a separate issue. I agree with pursuing the issue. I think it should be a committee referral.
And I'm not really sure, Mr. Baker, will you help me? Because the motion, as the clerk would read it, is accept the committee's recommendation and ask the city attorney at the same time. Should those be divided into two motions since they're separate issues? And I think the definition of citizen, and you indicated about council member versus citizen, I got a little bit confused, Mayor Pro Tem, when you said, well, the council members, if they're sick, they can either come in, they would be recognized as citizen and not council members in the minutes. I'm just looking for some of the guidance here.
I think that's what Mr. Baker would work on.
And yes, that is part, if the council, it's really up to council if you want to put it in one motion or separate. I'd like separate to make sure that everyone understands what it is that they're voting on and and if they've got an issue. But it's not to decide that tonight, what it's going to look like. It's to bring back some options to you. It could be referred to committee, or it could be, I could just bring it back to council. That's really up to the will of the group.
All right, I still, Mr. Driggs, did you now, I think what I'm going to say, this attorney has ruled that separate motions would be appropriate and more clear for the group to vote on. So we'll have separate motions instead of a substitute motion, and we'll go with that as a ruling by the parliamentarian. So with that, I think Mr. Driggs.
Point of order. I'm not sure that's what he said. He said that it was council's decision how we wanted to have those motions.
I don't think that we can set aside the substitute motion like that. It's been made and seconded, and I think we need to vote on it.
Okay.
I would hope we vote
Okay.
against it with the understanding that our intention is to pass this and separately to reach a consensus about pursuing the public
I
participation
guess I
question.
was, okay, I understand exactly what you're saying. So we have a substitute motion.
Actually, Ms. Molina
And
has,
Ms. Molina, I think you have not spoken yet, so yes.
No, I'm actually, so I'm trying to gain some clarification because I too am a bit confused because it appears based on the conversation and the points, although we're saying that we would like for the public to be able to participate virtually, that it seems as though we are saying that the council member can participate as a citizen, or I'm really trying to make sure that I understand what we're saying here. Are we setting a precedent? Like, we need some specificity. Now that we can't, separate the two, the motion and the substitute motion, then specifically, what are we saying and who does this apply to? And then I have a few what ifs that come to mind, especially from a business perspective. And I did share this with my colleagues. I think what I'm saying here, and trust me, the ability to be home, I have 2 children. That point wouldn't be wasted on me. I'm a mom, right? And I'm a single mom at that. So if I can still do my work and still be home with my babies if they're sick, or even if I'm sick, and still do the people's business, and if it was legal, it would make perfect sense to me. But under the same voice, it has to make sense for the body of government that we represent. And so I'm asking for clarity to make sure that I understand what I'm trying to support here. And I really need to understand from your perspective what this means.
So the substitute motion is to accept the report coming out of the committee. So that's one. And then the second part of the motion is to direct the city attorney to come back to the council with potential options for public participation. So we haven't gotten into a council member is going to be different than the public, or a lot of the questions that I think you're going to have. It is truly to send it back to me to develop some options for the council to think on public participation in council meetings, in virtual participation by the public in council meetings. That's all that's being requested right now.
It's just the public, and that's it.
That's it. And for me to come back.
That's not what was said.
That's not, I think.
See, that's why I'm asking for clarification, because
The city attorney answers, Ms. Johnson said, and the council too, but I want to make sure that
It's not.
what's in the motion.
My intent,
not
my
what was
So
motion.
can you read the Ms. Johnson's motion, please?
Okay, so
Madam Clerk?
let me just clarify.
Well,
Can I just clarify?
I think if we have the clerk
Okay,
clarify,
fine.
that's what we'd be voting
They're
on.
not sick anymore.
Okay.
Okay. I'm trying to find it.
We've got to get better at city council. Councilor.
Ms. Johnson's motion was, the substitute motion was to accept the committee's report and to refer to the city attorney, a report back to the council on options available for public participation to include the city council, is what I heard.
Okay. So that includes the city council as well in that motion. All right, so we have a substitute motion. Everyone has had an opportunity that raised their hand. So the substitute motion, you've heard it from the city clerk. All in favor of the substitute motion, please raise your hands. We have 3. All of those opposed to the motion, please raise your hands. All right, 4. The motion is, Mr. Parliamentarian, it would not have, and I guess you're a yes vote, so you make it 4-4. If you don't raise your hand, you're counted as a yes vote. Okay?
I'm just unsure what to do. I'm willing to break the tie if you'd like me to.
No, you have to take 6 votes to.
There's no
And
six.
you don't have 6
Either way,
votes,
there's no
either
six.
way.
The
So
motion
the
fails.
item is defeated.
It goes back to
It goes
the
back to the
original
original
motion.
motion. So we now have the original motion, which was stated as accept the committee's recommendation. And do we need to have the clerk read that?
No.
All right?
Can she read that agenda?
All right, all in favor of the original motion, the recommendation by the committee, please raise your hands. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that motion passes. All right?
Oppose?
Ms. Johnson? And any against?
And opposed? Ms. Johnson, thank you very much. Thanks for the reminder. I always forget that because we usually well, we're doing that. All right, so the next item on our agenda is item 14, the Metropolitan Planning Program Grant Municipal Agreement. Adopt a resolution authorizing the manager to negotiate and execute a municipal agreement with NCDOT to support transit planning for the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization, commonly known as CARPO. Adopt a resolution authorizing the manager as its designation or its designee to execute an interlocal agreement with Iredell County Transportation System in Union County to support the same transit planning activities for the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization. Adopt a resolution authorizing the manager or his designee to execute interlocal agreements with Huntersville, Menhill, Mooresville, and Troutman to support transportation planning projects.
Move to approve A, B, and C.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, please raise your hand if you're in favor of the motion. And that's unanimous. Thank you. The next item is items 15, WorldLink Wireless lease at the Charlotte Transportation Center. Adopt a resolution approving a 5-year lease agreement with WorldLink Wireless for the operation of a mobile phone retail store at the Charlotte Transportation Center, authorizing the manager to execute necessary documents. Do we have a motion to?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. Is there any discussion? Ms. Johnson?
Yes, thank you.
Ms.
My
Harris?
question, thank you. My question was, we're proposing, there's a 5-year lease proposed, but just last week we were talking about the demolition of the CTC. So I wanted to know how prudent it is to enter into a 5-year lease when we know that we're discussing demolition of that same facility.
Ms. Harris?
Thank you. And yes, ma'am, we definitely know we're discussing that. It's still in preliminary stages right now, so we don't have a definitive date when this, when we'll have to vacate the premises. So this is giving us the option, like you mentioned, it is a 5-year, but moving forward, all this transit leases at this facility have a specific clause that, and we talked to them up front as well, so they know our plans, it's not going to be sprung on them. And also within the lease, it gives us the right to give them 90 days notice. And this sorry.
And that clause just requires 90 days notice to terminate?
Yes, ma'am.
Does it give them first right of refusal for the new facility?
No, ma'am.
I know there's a lot of discussion about the demolition, even public discussion, and I guess I didn't anticipate that all of this discussion was surrounding something that that would be 5 years from now.
Yes, so this is pretty standard. We usually do 5-year leases, so with the knowledge, and we're being real upfront with anybody that enters a new lease, that it probably will not be 5 years, and they're aware of that and willing to take that on.
So why wouldn't we just enter into a shorter lease?
We could, but, these do have a 3-year escalation year over year, so we get 3% more each year. And then plus the vendor has a comfort level. Well, I'm pretty sure they will not do it within a year, but then if they have to risk us saying no within a year, even when we don't need the facility, it just gives the vendor a more comfort level as well.
I understand the city's real estate department operating and entering into a 5-year lease because that's what they do. But when it comes to our level, we know that
Okay. Mr. Bakari?
So just to recap for everyone, so we can get through this, we have to operate as business as usual until we make a strategic decision to do something else. They've got that, they're operating every day, and they've struck into the contract and the conversation, the levers to pull if we make another decision. If we don't, then they can continue operating like they have to. If they do, they've been fully transparent and there's absolutely no issue. This shouldn't be a conversation.
All right. Thank you. And with no further discussion, all in favor of the motion for the lease, please raise your hand. Please raise your hand. Opposed? That is 6 to 2. Thank you. All right, the motion is approved. All right, Madam Clerk, you now have nominations to, the results of the nominations that council submitted.
And there is a speaker for the first one.
That's right, we have a speaker for the bicycle. Thank you, please come down. I think it's good to see you again. Mr. Branham.
Good evening, happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
It's been a long day, a long night. My name is Dustin Branham. I am with the Bicycle Advisory Committee, and I really appreciate you hearing from me during this 3 minutes tonight. We as a committee have struggled recently with vacancies, and a lot of that is due to the inability to have virtual attendance at our meetings. And so this was a topic of conversation earlier this evening. I want you to know that we have struggled with it, and we've lost several members due to it. People have busy personal lives, and they simply can't make it by 6 p.m. to meetings. And I think that we have lost either 2 or 3 valuable members as a result of that. So we would urge you as a committee to consider allowing, if it's within the realm of possibility, to consider allowing virtual attendance, and it would help us a lot. That being said, we have submitted We've submitted or are in the process of submitting 4 names to the mayor and to council to fill the 3 mayoral vacancies and the 1 council vacancy. Either you already have those right now or they are on their way. And we feel very strongly about those applications, and I hope that you'll take our recommendations. So that being said, while I'm here tonight, I want to talk with you quickly about 1 or 2 things. The first is Vision Zero. We recently heard from city staff about how it collects data and some of the data it has collected for Vision Zero. But we've also learned that in order to truly make our streets safer for bicyclists, you can't just reduce speed limits. You have to also redesign roads. That means making it more difficult for drivers to drive fast and sometimes to encourage them to choose other routes. In looking around the city, we are asking for a more focused effort to concentrate on redesigning those roads. It'll make us safer, and it'll make our city a better place. Now, we're also, I want to talk with you about one more issue, and that's the pushback that I expect you to get from measures like that. Drivers will push back. It happens in cities across the country every time these redesigns occur. And I would just ask you to take a long-term lens on that. If we wait 5 years, 10 years to make these changes, then it's going to be too late. The city is full of dense residential projects in some of our urban neighborhoods. And if we don't make these changes now, then every one of those new residents will have a car that they'll bring with them. Imagine South End with 25,000 more cars than it has today. And then imagine yourself as a bicyclist in South End with those 25,000 more cars. We're asking for a focused effort, and we really appreciate all you've done so far for us. We really do. Let's not just be another Sunbelt city. Let's be a great Sunbelt city. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Branham. So now we'll find out whether or not your list of 4 made it through this process. So, Madam Clerk, if you would go through the nominations for us, and I believe the first one is the Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Yes, ma'am, and I would also add that there are several committees, most of these actually have received 6 or more nominations, so at the conclusion, if you so choose, you could make a motion to appoint these individuals that received more than 6 votes, to appoint them tonight.
Is there any, is it the council, okay, we would all continue that process. If you had 6 or more votes, we would nominate, you would fill tonight. Great, thank you.
For the Bicycle Advisory Committee, Kristen Masorley received 9 nominations. For the Business Advisory Committee, there are no recommendations from the Hispanic Contractors Association nor from the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. For the Charlotte Business Inclusion Advisory Committee, there are no recommendations from the Hispanic Contractors Association nor the Latin American Chamber of Commerce. For the Charlotte Equitable Development Commission, Trevor Bolito received 7 nominations. For the Charlotte Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization Commission, Vanessa Allen received 9 nominations. For the Housing Finance category, for the Resident Experienced or Experiencing Displacement, Monique Humphreys received 9 nominations. For the Civil Service Board, Nicholas Peach received 7 nominations. For the Historic District Commission, there are no applications for a business owner of Dilworth or for a resident owner of Hermitage Court. For the Keep Charlotte Beautiful Committee, Jonathan Dubose received 10 nominations. However, we've been notified that he has moved out of state and is no longer eligible. So we'll bring that one back to you.
Okay.
For the Passenger Vehicle for Hire, no applications. For representative of the hospitality tourism industry, no applications. For persons with disability. For the Planning Commission, Rebecca Wilden received 10 nominations as a recommendation by the Board of Education. For Stormwater Advisory, there are no nominations. For General Contractor and for Transit Services Advisory Committee, no applications for a van pool rider.
All right, do we have a motion to accept the nominations for those that received at least 6 votes?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say, raise your hand. That's unanimous. Thank you. With that, this meeting is
Madam Mayor, I've got something.
I'm
Before we
sorry.
adjourn, I've got something.
Ms. Watlington?
Yep, I just want to go back to the question that I had previously about the remaining budget items.
I can't
I just want to
hear.
go back to the question I had previously about the remaining budget committee referrals. I just wanted to know what the plan was on those items, the governance ones.
You want to know the items, I really could not hear you.
The budget and effectiveness committee items, there are 3 remaining. I wanted to know what the plan was for those 3. We talked about the virtual meetings. They were on a list of 4 things, I believe, that were still on the referral, so I just wanted to know what the plan was for the rest of them.
Which 4?
So there was a talk of the 8th district, there was the number of council members needed to add something to agenda, and there was, I think, 4-year terms. I just want to know where those referrals are, or those open items.
We don't have that as open items in our list. So,
All right,
Mr. Cagle, yeah, if you could.
So Brent, let me try to be helpful here, okay? Okay, so if you will, Mayor and Council, when we tried to give you all of the items that were still remaining in committee, and sometimes the committee, as Brent called it, the merger of equals, there were several items in what was budget and effectiveness that we called the gray box at the bottom. I think that's what you're referring to.
Correct.
And that included 4-year terms, 8 districts, and some other items. I think very similar to Councilmember Ashmera when she was posed with the question of dealing with virtual meetings. It was, this thing has been bounced back and forth between council and the committee. So it was in that gray box because it's in that same space. Brent, did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
No, if I'm saying something wrong, so help me.
So the item, so the four-year terms and additional districts was in committee. It was voted on out of committee. However, there was also a presentation by the city attorney's office related to the timing associated with how to do that. And it was determined that because of the timing related to it, this was an item that could be brought back before council probably somewhere in the early parts of 2023. And so it wasn't that it wasn't discussed or has bounced back and forth. It was discussed, as Mr. Driggs, the former chair, can attest. It was discussed, it was voted on, but there was a timing issue about bringing it forward for full council and consideration.
All right, Mr. Driggs, yes, help us out
I
here.
wanted to say further to that, there was the issue about whether there would be a referendum and so on, because those tests applied as well. So we had received a kind of timeline running up to a certain point, and I think the conclusion was that we would need to start in the spring sometime in order to act on this next year. And so that was not scheduled for more immediate action. We were going to, for one, have the new council join, because it was felt that the new council should work on that. And we knew that we had several more months before we ran up against a critical path constraint.
I think we're looking for the critical path.
So
I'm sorry.
I had a
Yes,
comment. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
It was my understanding, as far as the four-year votes, that the previous council wanted to talk about that before the new council was elected. And I know with the number of individuals that it required to get on the agenda, that was brought up in April of 2021. And there's a statute, and Mr. Baker, if you can help me, that the initiator can ask for that to come back before council if it doesn't come out of committee within 90 days. Is that correct?
It's a rule of procedure, yes.
Rule of procedure, yeah. So, I mean, we can certainly ask for that to be on the agenda, that item. I don't see where I would go back to committee. It's been to committee since April of 2021.
So does that require majority?
I don't know.
I don't remember a council action that resolved when, before, or after. I remember conversations on the subject of which group was more appropriate. And I think my impression was that there was a sentiment in favor of allowing the people who are going to actually be affected by it to participate. But if there is some record of a council action saying that we should try to do it before, truth is we didn't. And so here we are. I don't know what to say.
Is there any record on the referral for the number of council members to place something on the agenda? Is there a record of any?
Madam Mayor, not to my recollection, but we will check the record of the Budget and Governance Committee to confirm, to verify.
Okay.
So I'll just finish my comment up, then I'll just formally make a request that we get an update on those items and where they stand on the.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and well, let me just ask, as the initiator, if the procedure is that if it hasn't been discussed, can we bring it to council? I mean, what's that procedure?
Well, I'm assuming that's what the update will give us the foundation for it, and then the council can decide how to do that. If they want to put it on the agenda, I think that's basically what would happen. So let's get the update and then see what happens.
Okay, can I just say one, you talked about a walk earlier. There's an African-American male wellness walk this Saturday. Yeah.
So
at
do you have the
7
date
a.m.
and the time?
Yeah, 7 a.m. The African-American male wellness walk is at Friendship Baptist
Yeah,
Church.
I've participated in that
I know you
before.
did. They were disappointed you won't be there this year. So hopefully our Mayor Pro Tem, Saturday, October 15th.
Just real quick, 3 important words I just want to say, pterodactyl, horseshoes, and potato salad. I just wanted to see what the sign language was for those 3.
Epidemiological.
That was amazing.
Oh, that's terrible.